We are following breaking news as well in the Texas school shooting. Officials just wrapped up a news conference trying to clarify the timeline and where the investigation stands. The director of the state's Department of Public Safety saying it was, quote, the wrong decision for officers, 19 of them who were inside the school, to wait to breach the classroom where the gunman was holed up on Tuesday. He also said an armed officer did not confront the shooter before he entered the school, but instead went past the shooter. That is contrary to previous reports. Take a listen.
It was certainly stated in preliminary interviews, but often these preliminary interviews and a cursory walkthrough doesn't reveal the type of information, and certainly police officers, like anyone else, under stress, sometimes witnesses get it wrong. But the bottom line is that officer was not on scene, not on campus, but had heard the 911 call with a man with a gun, drove immediately to the area.
Right now, more than a dozen people remain hurt. The community of Uvalde, of course, grief-stricken and so many lost. Let's bring in MSNBC anchor Yasmin Basugian. She's in Uvalde. I heard you ask a question that I wanted answered, Yasmin, when you asked about the situation of those children who were inside a classroom. And this gets really disturbing. So if people have kids in the room, they might want to turn us off for a minute. There were children in the classroom who were calling 911, 2 of them at least. And outside the door of the classroom, there were 19 law enforcement officers who were not approaching the classroom. It's unclear whether they understood that there were 911 calls being made from inside, right? Can you explain what we now know out of that press conference?
For me, I mean, Kate, you and I are parents. I think probably a lot of people watching this are parents. You don't have to be a parent, I think, even to understand the grief that all of these parents are dealing with, but also to understand the fact that the lives of these children may have been able to be saved had they acted sooner. That, especially that 911 call, Kate, at 12:03 that came in. It was the first 911 call that came in from inside those classrooms. The room 112 specifically, a teacher called, whispering to 911 saying, there is a shooter inside our classroom. Remember, they train for these things. Schools around the country, they train for active shooter drills. My kid as well in New York City trains for active shooter drills. 12:03, she says there is an active shooter inside the classroom. There are 8 to 9 children alive still. Alive still, meaning at that point, some children had died. Some children had been shot by the shooter. Those calls continued, Kate, all the way till 12:50, when in fact the shooter was neutralized. 12:10. 12:21. Some of those calls coming from students as well. And so I asked that question during the press conference saying, did that teacher survive? That called in at 12:03. I didn't get an answer. Did those children survive? The 8 to 9 children that were alive at 12:03 p.m. when she called. I didn't get an answer. All we got was definitively they know 2 of the individuals that called in on 911, and there were multiple calls from inside those classrooms, did survive. The rest of them, they don't know. I'll tell you this, Kate, as well. Yesterday, we thought there was about 12 minutes from the time to which the shooter crashed his car to when he made his way into the school. Now we know that time has shrunk. It was 5 minutes from when he made his way from the crash site into the school. But the first 911 call, and this is also suspect, Kate, was made at 11:30 a.m. after the crash by the shooter from 2 folks at the funeral home who were shot at, saying a man has crashed his truck outside of an elementary school and he has a gun on him. 11:30, that is an hour and 20 minutes before this shooter was in fact neutralized. And there's the golden hour, which you and I both, go ahead, no please, go ahead.
No, it's all devastating. What I couldn't quite understand is, so he gets in through it sounds like a back door that had been propped open by a teacher who maybe had gone outside to make a phone call. Did I get that right?
No, so what we're learning, let me just clear that up. What we're learning is a teacher propped open the door. Again, so that morning there was a lot of parents in and out of the school because there was kind of an award ceremony. They were giving out the certificates that we've seen with many of the children getting these certificates now. Subsequently after their death. And so a lot of parents had been in and out of the school throughout the day celebrating this. It was 2 days before, obviously, the end of the school year, heading out to celebrate Memorial Day weekend. And so a teacher had propped open that back door. She had run back to the classroom for a cell phone, at that point not knowing anything that was happening. That was my understanding. And then made her way back to that door, but the door remained propped open at that moment. We do know that all the doors are supposed to be closed, and so there's the question as to why that door remained propped open. One other thing I want to talk about, which is the presence or the lack thereof of the school resource officer. There should have been a school resource officer on campus. Initially, we had reports that there was a school resource officer on campus who confronted the shooter. We now know that's not true. So there's a school resource officer who was not on campus. Where was the school resource officer? The school resource officer was driving somewhere, heard of an active shooting happening at Robb Elementary, made his way towards the school, sped, as they said in the press conference, towards the school, bypassed the shooter, thinking another individual who ended up being a teacher was in fact the shooter, while the shooter continued to shoot from outside the school, crouched behind a bush. And so there were so many breakdowns.
Yeah.
And then the SWAT team, Kate, and then I'll throw it back to you. There's a Uvalde SWAT team, by the way. There is a Uvalde SWAT team that trains for something just like this. They said it's a part-time SWAT team, and the personnel were not in place to respond to this very incident that they trained for.
So the 19 law enforcement officers who did get inside, so once he makes his way to the classrooms, there's two of them, they're adjoined. He gets inside and locks the doors, they said today. And there are officers who also get inside, right? The 19, they said, were in the hallway.
19.
Did I understand correctly that it was the police chief who was the incident commander? I might have that wrong.
The police chief was the incident commander.
Okay, and he
you have that right.
He thought that it was he said today in the press conference, they said that the incident commander believed that it was a barricaded suspect at that point, meaning the shooting was over and it was just a guy barricaded in a room, as I understand it. And that's why they didn't move toward the door. Do I have that right?
You have that exactly right. However, there were 911 calls being made from inside the school at the time of which the incident commander thought it was a barricaded suspect who was no longer shooting.
So there's obviously a huge breakdown. And
so that doesn't add up. And I don't want to be morbid, but I just want to say this one thing. And I think there's two things that we need to really find out. And it's first and foremost, the time of death of many of these children. And I say that only to say that these parents need to know answers as to why their babies are gone. And it helps. Sorry, it's hard, you know.
It's okay. It's really hard. I'll tell you what.
It helps them get closure, as much closure as they can get. And I think that by understanding the time of death of these children, it will help make sense of where the breakdown happened. If in fact they find out that there were officers inside that building and there were still children alive that subsequently died, there will then be launched an FBI investigation into who should be held accountable for this breakdown so that it never happens again. But of course, here we are again covering yet another mass shooting, as we do in this job. And, you know, it's an incredibly hard time, and parents just needing these answers, and we're just trying to get it for them.
Yeah, I know that.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.